Hello, everybody. Um, this is actually a little bit early. It's like 15 minutes early before everything gets started. And it's only going to be happening on the YouTubers part because, I just wanted to do something. I also want to just test the connectivity, give things a second to load up, and another Tenacious Thursday. The text for the chat is a little bit off. It's about like maybe 20 so seconds off. It's interesting. And sometimes it picks up too many of them. Pick that one off. Warm day today. It's 48, so I've got about 10 minutes before I start the stream over on Facebook. So if anybody pops in, Facebook. Okay, this is gonna be a little bit boring, but if you're in the chat, let me know you're in here, even if it's not live. And I know you're here on this Trippy, Tenacious Thursday. I smelled it. Very good. I don't want to remove the whole thing just to correct that because all the letters are there. I just forgot a punctuation point. We have about 10 minutes before the Facebookers need to be up on the Facebook. Hello. I'm just getting started. We haven't quite got started yet. I came on a little bit early to give YouTubers a little bit of extra stuff, and also the Patreon people a little bit of extra stuff through the YouTubes. Just say hello in the chat if you're here. There's a little bit of a delay, but I've always welcomed everybody being here. So we're going to get started with the actual reading portion of this in about 10 minutes. And we're going to be reading Trippy, Tenacious Thursday, as per usual. We're going to be reading the next chapter to War of the Worlds. And that chapter. Okay. I'm just sitting here, hanging out for about the next 10 minutes while I'm drinking my tea. So how is everybody doing? Can you hear me? I'll say brilliant because that would be ridiculous, but is it decent at the very least? Is there video? That's probably what I should say. Is there video? Really, is there? Because sometimes I'm not quite sure. Hello. We've got two people in here. We're just waiting for us to get started. Giving YouTubers a bit of an extra chance to say something in the chat, get a little bit of a shout out going, and talk and stuff like that. And that is not available to the other peoples, but we'll get started with the actual reading at about 9. Good thought, right? We're just going to get started in about 10 minutes, but until we get started, there are a couple of things that I need to say. To let you know how widespread this actually is. We are actually, let's go to list all the things this will actually be on or archived on as soon as the stream ends. It will be archived on Anchor and all the podcasting catchers that that distributes to. Will also be on Podbean and all the things that distributes to. Just got back on Podbean, got the payment figured out. But and it will be also archived on Patreon. And if you want to help support the podcast and keep it going, even through these rather tumultuous times, Patreon for as little as $1 a month. One of the things you'll get access to is I am actually also creating a Oracle deck, and the $1 people on Patreon will gain access to my notes, progress reports on how that's going, and also they'll be able to give their input into be able to do that. At the very least, you can donate on a monthly basis. Be willing to donate a little bit more on Patreon, $5 a month. Not only do you get access to some of the exclusive content concerning the Oracle deck and some input power for the I'm guessing about 9 months to a year out. When it is produced, you will receive a exclusive discount on the purchase price for it to get started. But to let you know, just another place that I'm archiving this is, of course, YouTube. I archived this on my YouTube page, Kindling the Hearthfire, which I'm on at the moment, and it will be under the headline of playlist of nighttime reading hour, and it will be labeled as such in the playlist. And I am labeling them by the days of the week that they come out and which chapters of which book that they will. I see there's one person that is here. Nobody's talking in the chat or anything, but if you want to pop on the chat and ask questions or have comments or just want to do emoticons all day long, that's perfectly fine. But so we've got about maybe 5 more minutes until I actually get the Facebook people on here and get started with the actual reading itself. If you follow the podcast, you know that I haven't done a podcast in a couple of months because of personal tragedies that have been going on in my life. Not to go into too much detail because I don't want to turn this into a ball fest or anything. Volume this year suddenly, and I've had to reconfigure a lot of my priorities and things of that nature. But the podcast, the official podcast that I would usually get out every 6 weeks, the next one for Lunasa is going to be coming out in the next couple of weeks. I've been very busy with trying to make rent and all that good stuff and moving, which is a whole world in its own. But that's what I've been doing as of late. Event listed on Facebook. But in case you don't know what the podcast is, and you're somehow on my page, the Kindling the Hearthfire podcast page, the official podcast is every 6 weeks during we celebrate the time of year. And what we currently celebrated last week was Lunasa. And we'll be doing a lot more information on that time of year, what other people have done during that time of year, what's going to be happening in the coming months for that time of year, and general information. I'm trying to get some astrological stuff in there. I'm also trying to get some Patreon. It is also on Anchor and pretty much any podcasting format you would like to look up to. It's under Kindling the Hearthfire. Get the Facebook people on here and get this whole thing show on the road. All right. So And if you're on the chat, please feel free to chat in the chat, because that's kind of how I let me know what went. The wind is a very wonderful creature, but in their own rights. But you know, all right. So we got 2 more minutes. I'll get the Facebook feed started to get that going. And I've got my microphone connected. We are now live on Facebook. Welcome everybody to that's on that. To post this on both on Patreon and on the actual podcast site. Otherwise, so welcome everybody to Thursday. If you've got a better name for today, then I would totally love it. The only stipulations. So let's see. How much tea do I have left? I don't have much tea, so let's get this set up and give everybody a chance to get their teacups filled, or get some beverages and get settled in here. And we'll get this done and ready to go. My tea set up because okay, so I got my tea set up, got it stirred up, everybody got their beverages, and it's settled and comfortable. And I suppose we can get started with chapter 17 of War of the Worlds. Let's get this here and get this set up so I can actually see it. I read this on my Kindle, and sometimes my Kindle can be rather incompatible with a lot of my other electronic equipment. Okay. Alright, so chapter 17, The Thunder Child of War of the Worlds. Alright. Had the Martians aimed only at destruction, they might, on Monday, have annihilated the entire population of London. As it spread itself slowly through the home counties, not only along the road through Barnet, but also through Edgware and Waltham Abbey, and along the roads eastward to Southend and Shoeburyness, poured the same frantic rout. If one could have hung that June morning in a balloon in the blazing blue above London, every northward and eastward road, running out of the tangled maze of streets, would have seemed stippled, black with the streaming fugitives. Each dot a human agony of terror and physical distress. I have set forth at length in the last chapter of my mother's account of the road through Chipping Barnet, in order that my readers may realize how that swarming of black dots appeared to one of those concerned. Never before in the history of the world had such a mass of human beings moved and suffered together. The legendary hosts of Goths and Huns, the hugest armies ate a goal, unprovisioned, out of civilization. Directly below him, the balloonist would have seen the network of streets, far and wide. Houses, churches, squares, crescents, gardens, already derelict, spread out like a huge map. And in the southward, blotted. Over Ealing, Richmond, Wimbledon, it would have seemed as if some monstrous pen had flung ink upon the chart. Steadily, incessantly, each black splash grew and spread itself against rising ground, now pouring swiftly over crest into a new-found valley, exactly as a gout of ink would spread itself upon blotting paper. And beyond, over the blue hills that rise southward of the river, the glittering Martians went to and fro, calmly and methodically, spreading their poison cloud over this patch of country and then over that, laying it again with their steam jets when it had served its purpose, and taking possession of the conquered country. They do not seem to have aimed at extermination as much as at complete demoralization and the destruction of any opposition. They exploded any stores of powder they came upon, cut there. They were hamstringing mankind. They seemed in no hurry to extend the field of their operations, and did not come beyond the central part of London all that day. It is possible that a very considerable number of people in London stuck to their houses through Monday morning. Certain it is that many died at home, suffocated by the black smoke. Until about midday, the Pool of London was an astonishing scene. Steamboats and shipping of all sorts lay there, tempted by the enormous sums of money offered by fugitives, and it is said that many who swam out to these vessels were thrust off with boat-hooks and drowned. About 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the thinning remnant of a cloud of the black vapor appeared between the arches of Blackfriars Bridge. At that the pool became a scene of mad confusion, fighting and collision, and for some time a multitude of boats and barges jammed in the northern arch of Tower Bridge. And the sailors and lighter men had to fight savagely against the people who swarmed upon them from the riverfront. People were actually clambering down the piers of the bridge from up above. When an hour later a Martian appeared beyond the clock tower and waded down the river, nothing but wreckage floated above Limehouse. Of the falling of the fifth cylinder I have presently to tell. The sixth star fell at Wimbledon. My brother, keeping watch beside the women in a meadow, saw the green flash of it far beyond the hills, on swarming country across Colchester, at Highgate, and even, it was said, at Neasden. But they did not come into my brother's view until the morrow. That day the scattered multitude ceased to be regarded. Farmers were out to defend their cattle sheds, granaries, and ripening root crops with arms in their hands. A number of people now, like my brother, had their faces eastward, and there were some desperate souls even going back towards London to get food. These were chiefly people from the northern suburbs, whose knowledge of the black smoke came by hearsay. He heard that about half the members of the government had gathered at Birmingham, and that enormous quantities of high explosives were being prepared to be used in automatic mines across the Midland counties. He was also told that the Midland Railway Company had replaced the desertions of the first day's panic, had resumed traffic, and was running northward trains from St. Albans to relieve the congestion of the home counties. There was also a placard in Chipping Ongar announcing that large stores of flour were available in the northern towns, and that within 24 hours bread would be distributed among the starving people in the neighborhood. But this intelligence did not deter him from the plan of escape he had formed, and the three pressed eastward all day, and heard no more of the blood distribution from this promise. Nor, as a matter of fact, did anyone else hear more of it. That night fell the seventh star, falling upon Primrose Hill. It fell while Miss Elphinstone was watching, For she took that duty alternately with my brother. She saw it. On Wednesday, the three fugitives, they had passed the night in a field of unripe wheat, reached Chelmsford, used the pony as provisions, and would give nothing in exchange for it but the promise of a share in it the next day. Here there were rumors of Martians at Epping, and news of the destruction of Waltham Abbey powder mills, and a vain attempt to blow up one of the invaders. People were watching for Martians here from the church towers. My brother, very luckily for him as it chanced, preferred to push on at once to the coast rather than wait for food, although all three of them were very hungry. By midday they passed through Tillingham, which strangely enough seemed to be quite silent and deserted, save for a few furtive plunderers hunting for food. Near Tillingham, they suddenly came in sight of the sea, and the most amazing crowd of shipping of all sorts that it is possible to imagine. For after the sailors could no longer come up the Thames, they came on to the Essex coast, to Harwich and Bolton and Clacton, and afterwards to Foulness and Shoebury, to bring off the people. They lay in a huge sickle-shaped curve that vanished into mist at last towards the Naze. Close inshore was a multitude of fishing smacks, names, yachts, electric boats, and beyond were ships of larger burden, a multitude of filthy colliers, trim merchantmen, cattle ships, passenger boats, petroleum tanks, ocean tramps, an old white transport even, neat white and gray liners from Southampton and Hamburg. And my brother could make out dimly a dense swarm of boats chattering with the people on the beach, a swarm which extended up the black water almost to Meldon. About a couple of miles out lay an iron Thunderchild. It was the only warship in sight, but far away to the right over the smooth surface of the sea, for that day there was a dead calm. Lay a serpent of black smoke to mark the next ironclads of the Channel Fleet, which hovered in an extended line, steam up and ready for action, across the Thames estuary during the course of the Martian conquest, vigilant and yet powerless to prevent it. At the sight of the sea, Miss Elphinstone, in spite of the assurances of her sister-in-law, gave way to panic. She had never been out of England before. She would rather die than trust herself friendless in a foreign country, and so forth. She seemed, poor woman, to imagine that the French and the Martians might prove very similar. She had been growing increasingly hysterical, fearful, and depressed during the 2 days' journeys. Her great idea was to return to Stanmore. Things had always been well and safe at Stanmore. They would find George at Stanmore. It was with the greatest difficulty they could get her down to the beach, where presently my brother succeeded in attracting the attention of some men on a paddle steamer from the Thames. Pounds for the three. The steamer was going, these men said, to Ostend. It was about 2:00 when my brother, having paid their fares at the gangway, found himself safely aboard the steamboat with his charges. There was food aboard, albeit at exorbitant prices, and the three of them contrived to eat a meal on one of the sheets. There were already a couple of score of passengers aboard, some of whom had expended their last money in securing a passage. But the captain lay off the Blackwater until 5 in the afternoon, picking up passengers until the seated decks were dangerously crowded. He would probably have remained longer had it not been for the sound of guns that began about that hour in the south. As if in answer, the ironclad seaward fired a small gun and hoisted a string of flags. A jet of smoke sprang as firing came from Shoeburyness, until it was noticed that it was growing louder. At the same time, for away in the southeast, the mast and the upper works of these three ironclads rose one after the other out of the sea, beneath clouds of black smoke. But my brother's attention speedily reverted to the distant firing in the south. He fancied he saw a column of smoke rising out of the distant gray haze. The little steamer was already flapping her way eastward of the big crescent of shipping, and the low Essex coast was growing blue and hazy, when a Martian appeared, small and faint in the remote distance, advancing along the muddy coast from the direction of Foulness. At that the captain on the bridge swore at the top of his voice with fear and anger at his own delay, and the paddles seemed infected with his terror. Every soul aboard stood at the bulwarks or at the seats of the steamer and stared at the distant shape, higher than the trees or church towers inland, and advancing with, and he stood, more amazed than terrified, watching the wading farther and farther into the water as the coast fell away. Then, far away beyond the crouch, came another striding over stunted trees, and then yet another, still farther off, wading deeply through a shiny mud flat that seemed to hang halfway up between sea and sky. They were all stalking seaward, as if to intercept the escape of the multitudinous vessels that were crowded between Foulness and the Naze. In spite of the throbbing exertions of the engine of the little paddle boat, and the pouring foam that her wheels flung behind her, she receded with terrifying slowness from this ominous advance. Glancing northwestward, my brother saw the large crescent of shipping already writhing with the approaching terror. One ship passing behind another coming round from broadside to end on. Steamships whistling and giving off volumes of steam, sails being let out, launches rushing hither and thither. He was so fascinated by this, and by the creeping danger away to the left, that he had no eyes for anything seaward. And then a swift movement of the steamboat. She had suddenly came round to avoid being run down, flung him headlong from the seat upon which he was standing. There was a shouting all about him, a trampling of feet, and a cheer that seemed to be answered faintly. The steamboat lurched and rolled him over upon his hands. He sprang to his feet and saw to starboard, and not 100 yards from their heeling, pitching boat, a vast iron bulk like the blade of a plough tearing through the water, tossing it on either side in huge waves of foam that leaped towards the steamer, flinging her paddles helplessly in the air, and then sucking her deck down almost to the waterline. The douche of spray blinded my brother for a moment. When his eyes were clear again, he saw the monster had passed and was rushing land. Big iron upperworks rose out of this headlong structure, and from that twin funnels projected and spat a smoking blast shot with fire. It was the torpedo ram, Thunderchild, steaming headlong, coming to the rescue. My brother looked past this charging Leviathan at the Martians again, and he saw the three of them now close together, and standing so far out to sea that their tripod supports were almost entirely submerged. Thus sunken, and seen, they had appeared far less formidable than the huge iron bulk in whose wake the steamer was pitching so helplessly. It would seem they were regarding this new antagonist with astonishment. To their intelligence, it may be, the giant was even such another as themselves. The Thunder Child fired no gun, but simply drove full speed towards them. It was probably her not firing that enabled her to get so near the enemy as she did. They did not know what to make of her. One shell, and they would have sent her to the bottom forthwith with the heat ray. She was steaming at such a pace that in a minute she seemed halfway between the steamers. Suddenly the foremost Martian lowered his tube and discharged a canister of the black gas at the ironclad. It hit her larboard side and glanced off with an inky jet that rolled away to seaward, an unfolding torrent of black smoke, from which the ironclad drove clear. To the watchers from the steamer, it seemed as though they were already among the Martians. They saw the gaunt figures separating and rising out of the water as they retreated shoreward. And one of them raised the camera-like generator of the heat ray. He held it, pointing it obliquely downward, and a bank of steam sprang from the water at its touch. It must have driven through the iron of the ship's side like a white-hot iron rod through paper. In another moment, he was cut down. A great body of water and steam shot high in the air. The guns of the Thunder Child sounded through the reek, going off one after the other, and one shot splashed to the north and smashed smack to matchwood. But no one heeded that very much. At the sight of the Martian's collapse, the captain on the bridge yelled inarticulately, and all the crowding passengers on the steamer's stern shouted together. And then they yelled again, for surging out beyond the white tumult drove something long and black, the flames streaming from its middle parts, its ventilators and funnels spouting fire. She was alive still. The steam was within 100 yards of him when the heat ray came to bear. Then, with a violent thud, the blinding flash, her decks, her funnels leapt upward. The Martian staggered with the violence of her explosion, and in another moment the flaming wreckage, still driving forward with the impetuous of its pace, had struck him and crumpled him up like a thing of cardboard. My brother shouted involuntarily. A boiling tumult of steam hit everything again. "Two!" yelled the captain. Everyone was shouting. The whole steamer was end to end rang with frantic cheering that was taken up first by one and then by all in the crowding. A multitude of ships and boats that was driving to sea. The steam hung upon the water for many minutes, hiding the third Martian and the coast altogether. And all this time the boat was paddling steadily out to sea and away from the fight. And when at last the confusion cleared, the drifting bank of black vapor intervened, and nothing of the Thunder Child could be made out. Nor could the third Martian be seen. But the ironclads seawards were now quite close and standing in towards shore, and the ironclads receded slowly towards the coast, which was hidden by a marbled bank of vapor, part steam, part black gas, eddying and combining in the strangest way. The fleet of refugees was scattering to the northeast. Several smacks were sailing between the ironclads and the steamboats. After a time, and before they reached the sinking cloud bank, the warships turned northward, and then abruptly went about and passed into the thickening haze of evening southward. The coast grew faint, and at last indistinguishable amid the low banks of clouds that were gathering about the sinking sun. Then suddenly out of the golden haze of sunset came the vibration of guns, and a form of black shadows moving. Everyone struggled to the rail of the steamer and peered into the blinding furnace of the west. but nothing was to be distinguished clearly. A mass of smoke rose slanting and barred the face of the sun. The steamboat throbbed on its way through the interminable suspense. The sun sank into gray clouds. The sky flushed and darkened. The evening star trembled into sight. It was deep twilight when the captain cried out and pointed. My brother strained his eyes. Something rushed up into the sky out of the grayness, rushed slantingly upward and very swiftly into the luminous darkness above the clouds in the western sky. Something flat and broad and very large, that swept round in a vast curve, grew smaller, sank slowly, and vanished again into the gray mystery of the night. And as it flew, it rained down darkness upon the land. And so ends chapter 17. And next up, we'll be picking up on book 2, which is titled The Earth, and how we get to see what's going on Earth while the Martians are in control. All right, so thank you everyone for popping in, and I hope everyone has a very good evening. And check out the podcast if you're able, and check out the podcast also on Patreon if you want to help support the podcast, because this is a Patreon-supported podcast and broadcast. So talk to everyone later, and I hope everyone has a good evening, has a good night, and I will not be seeing you on Monday, which I'm really keen on seeing. I'll see if I can come on, but you'll see it on Facebook if I do come on. Or on YouTube or on Patreon if I do come on. So take a look on Friday if I don't show up, and that is the reason why. But if I do, it'll be Fairy Tale Friday, and where I'll be reading 3 or 4 different fairy tales from my collection that I have access to here. So talk to everyone later. Hope to see you again, and I hope everyone has a good evening and a good night. So